Hello, this is Mohamed Meligy, and today we'll be talking about Angular.js and the select elements. If you ever use the select element with Angular.js, you would probably see several problems when dealing with ng options directive, and you will have several problems. The most famous one is initial select, when your model does have a value but you can't see it selected in the select element until the user goes ahead and selects that value by themselves. So we'll start with this problem, and then we will go and explain many other tips and tricks when dealing with select in Angular to save you some headaches that I personally and some friends have been having for hours trying to just use a select element really. So let's get to the first example. To demonstrate the select problem with Angular.js, let's assume this scenario where you have a shopping website, you go to a product page, you select the quantity and shipment method, and then you come to this page to confirm and place your order. You should automatically find your quantity and shipment method selected like this, except in our example we can see the product name showing as Angular.js and the price per item showing, the quantity showing, but our selected shipment method is not actually selected, the express mail option. However, the total cost is in fact reflecting the cost of this shipment, which is $10, because the quantity 3, when we multiply it by the price per item 20, we get just 60. So there is a $10 for the shipment method. So the page already knows what shipment we chose, except that it's not able to select it in the drop down. And to see the model backing this page, we will go to the data source, which acts like the source for our data that may be coming from a server or whatever. We have an order which has a product with product ID, name, cost or price per item, and showing which quantities we can select from. This is what populates the quantity drop down in here, and we can imagine, for example, saying that you can only have 5 copies of the book in the same order. Of course, there are multiple ways to do it. Most of them are better than using this array, but this is just for simplicity. And then we also have, as part of the order, not the product, the actual quantity that was selected and the actual shipment that was selected as well. And we also have the lookup list for the shipment drop down in here. The shipment selected is an object that pretty much matches one of the objects in the array. In fact, it was created literally by copying it. However, Angular.js was not able to select it. Let's see how this page is created again in the HTML. So here we have a form. We are reading the data from the order, which is enabled in the scope. We are looping over the allowed quantity, also copied to the scope. And this is the most common syntax for ng option. It's not the only one. We can define which property we are interested in or group by or whatever. This is all available in the ngselect documentation page in Angular.js. But to demonstrate this, what we're saying is loop over the allowed quantities, and for each item in these allowed quantities give it a variable name of quantity that we can use later to say what text we want. So in this case, because it's just a number, we say okay, just display the quantity itself. and we say map this to the order quantity property, so that if our selection changes, the value of the quantity changes. This dump of data is coming from this controller, so here we copy the order to the scope, we copy the allowed quantities, we copy the shipment methods, and we provide a function that calculates the total cost based on the cost per item, the quantity, and the shipment flat cost. And what this means is that the shipment will be the same cost regardless of how many items you include in your order. And again, this is just for simplicity. This function is called down here when we ask for the total cost. And now to the shipment method, which has problems that we have with the selection. We'll notice that the shipment is handled exactly like the quantity. We loop over the shipment methods, and for each shipment we say we want to display the shipment name, and the ngselect syntax allows you to define which value you want to be set to the model, which is here the shipment. So we can say we want to select shipment dot shipment ID, and we want to display it as shipment dot name. However, if you don't select this, it will consider the value is the whole object, in this case the shipment, and this does make sense, and that's why we didn't use this syntax, because we don't want just to compare the ID, but we want to select the whole object. And by refreshing the page in here, we can see that it didn't really make any difference. In fact, if I make a selection now, you can see that our calculation breaks, because what happened is that it set the shipment to the shipment ID, and our method expects the shipment to be an object that has a flat cost property. So why is this happening? Why is it working in the quantity case but not working for the shipment method? To demonstrate this, it's actually quite simple. What ngrepeat is doing for each item in here is saying, okay, I'll compare the quantities that I have to the model that I have in here. And the fact that the model has the same name, quantity and quantity, doesn't really have anything to do with how this works. It's just comparing this object to that object, and these objects happen to be integers. So when ngrepeat compares the values, it doesn't care which kinds they are, like are they strings, are they numbers, are they object literals. It doesn't really care. It's just using plain JS comparison. And in Angular, in plain JavaScript, completely unrelated to Angular, if you say that the number 1 equals to number 1, of course you'll get true. And that's why we are easily finding the quantity selected in here. In shipment, it's quite different. We are comparing object literals in here. And again, Angular.js, all it's doing is that, okay, for each one of these, I'll take the object, it's an object literal, I'll just call it shipment or whatever, and I'll compare that object literal to this other object literal. And in plain JavaScript, completely unrelated to Angular.js again, object literal comparison doesn't work the same way. So I'll say here that I have an object that has a shipment ID set to 2, and I'll take the same object and say I want to see if it's equal to pretty much itself or a copy of itself or not. And we can see the answer is actually false. This is because when JavaScript sees an object literal, it considers it as an instance of a class, if you may, for simplification. So, like to relate this, if you are a developer in C# or Java or even C++, you can simply think of these as two completely different instances and two completely different pointers that point to two different objects in memories, and unless you implement the equality of these two objects, they will not be the same. And you can't really compare them equality in JavaScript like you do, for example, in C# by implementing get hash code and the equals operator and this kind of stuff. So what really happens in here is that you just have to find a way that the two references, and by these two references I mean the shipment reference inside the order and the, let's say, sample shipment methods of 0, 1, of 1, you want to make them point to the same object so that the comparison is a reference comparison to the same object, and then it can succeed, and then we can see the selected property to be set in here. We can do this in the controller. Let me give you a quick warning that if you don't like what you're going to see, yes, that's not the right answer. But we are trying to get closer. So let's say for each shipment method, whether we get it from the scope or the data source, it doesn't matter because there are two references to the same array. And we'll say, okay, for each shipment, again the variable name is not really important. If the shipment ID equals the scope dot order dot shipment ID. In this case, we want the shipment that we have inside the order to point to the same object that we have, and that's coming from that array. Let's see if this fixes it or not. In fact, it does, and we can easily see the values different when we change this in here. And I wonder whether you notice something or not, which is we used to have an empty option in here that we no longer have after we did the selection. And if I comment this and refresh the page again, you can see the empty selection here. If we pick any item from that list, you notice that the selection has gone again. And the reason we had this selection, and the reason it goes after we change the selection, is that when Angular failed to compare the items in the array to the ngModel, what it did is that it said, okay, I don't know how to deal with this, it doesn't belong to this list, but of course I need it because I have a model looking at it. So what I'll do is that I'll just add an empty option to point at it, and once you select any of these items, they give a value to the ngModel, and that's why Angular.js doesn't have a reason to add this empty option. Of course, that is a problem because most likely you either want to show this option forever or you don't want to show it at all. So we showed how you can have it hidden all the time if you are setting the model correctly, whether this way or in a different way. You can easily have it. But what if you still want to show the empty selection, or even just show some word like select or whatever? What you do is that you simply add it. So we will come in here, and inside this select we'll say, okay, here is an option, and display it in here. That's because we have this hidden. Let's bring it back. I don't want to trick you. So we have the selection and we have the empty options there. In this case, we don't really need the empty option, so I will remove it. And let's think again about how we did this. You probably don't want to have this method everywhere in your controller. This code doesn't really make sense. And what if in a more realistic scenario this was an order item in a table that's acting like your shopping cart or whatever, and you have many items like this? This means you would have this loop inside another loop that has all the order items that you have, and that's where it gets really messy. Of course you can like do this better, maybe you can encapsulate it in a filter or something, but it is still silly code, and yes, you can get rid of it, and that's using a feature that's not documented in Angular.js so far. So what Angular.js doesn't tell you is that one of the options you have when you have the ng options selection is that you can use things that are actually documented in Angular.js but in a completely different place. You can use some things from the ngrepeat directive. So ngrepeat directive allows you to do something very nice, which is called trackby. So here we can say trackby shipment dot shipment ID, and as you may have already guessed, when we say trackby shipment ID, what it's going to do is that instead of comparing the entire shipment object to the ng model, it will just compare a property that's called shipment ID. To confirm this is working and I'm not tricking you again, let's go back to the controller, and yes, we don't have the silly method that we had anymore, but it still shows this selection correctly. If I remove the trackby bit, we don't have the selection. So this is how we can tell Angular.js to just look at a particular property that we have. And again, here we have reliance on the type of the shipment ID. So here we are saying in each shipment of these there must be a shipment ID property, and also in the model there must be a shipment ID property. What if there is no shipment ID property? It will just be treated as an empty selection like you saw in here. And if you want to pre-select some item, if this value is empty, yes, you would have to make this check inside the controller. So going to the data source, we are also relying on the fact that the shipment ID is a number. What if shipment ID was a complex type, like an object literal, similar to shipment? Then the comparison would fail again, and you would want to rely on your own expression for the comparison in JavaScript rules. So here we did this selection, and while we are talking about that, and while we are talking about the ngModel, let me tell you, what would it be like if we didn't have an ngModel at all, not just something that doesn't have the shipment ID property? What happens is we don't get any item selected. Is that because of the trackby thingy? Let's remove it. And yeah, nothing changes. This is because what really happens with the select or ngselect directive that Angular.js uses to control the select element, very similar to all the other input or form directives inside Angular.js. They rely heavily on ngModel for displaying themselves. So in here, the ng options, if you don't have an ng model, it will not display it ever for any option, because the ng options directive has a dependency on the ng model directive, and yes, in Angular.js you can say that a particular directive will not work unless you have another directive on the same element or even on the parent elements. So if I return this as is, to compare this to a text box, for example, you don't really see the same problem in a text box, and that's because if you don't load the directive for the text box, if you don't have a model for the text box, the text box element itself stays there and you get an empty text box, and that's exactly what you expect when you don't have a model for the text box, of course. However, in here, if you don't have a model, you still get the select tag, but you don't get the option tags which show the options, and that's why you display it. I can't count how many times I was prototyping something and like I didn't really need a model. I was just testing some validation or whatever, and I'm like, no, it's not working, and that's because I forgot to add the ngmodel directive. So hopefully this will be a good tip for you. The next time you have a select, you add the options, and what? I can't see them. Where do they go? You just need to add this ngmodel property. And also, if you are sending this form by the server, like if you're just using Angular.js to manage a child form that has lists and other complex stuff, so just to make the user interaction with the form really nice, but at the end you plan to submit the entire page, not send it via Ajax, you may think that, okay, I don't need the ngmodel. You'll still have to enter it, and most of the time you'll have another problem as well when you are sending the select value to the server, and I'll explain it here. So if you look at the quantity and the options inside this quantity, they are not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as it says in here. They are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can easily guess what this is. Yes, this is the index of the elements inside the array that we're looping at. Angular.js is using that index to track which option corresponds to which element in the array, and while the index makes sense to get an object from an array, it doesn't make sense when you send it to the server, really. If you are just submitting this page and the value is 0 for the quantity, this doesn't make sense. What the user really wanted is maybe one item of this product, but the server will get the value 0, and unless the server knows that, oh my god, it's just Angular and I need to treat this as an index of some array, the server will be getting the wrong value. As a side effect of our trackby syntax, though, we are getting different options in there. So you can see the options are showing 1, 2, and 3, the actual shipment IDs, instead of just indexes. And this means that if we are submitting this page directly to the server, the entire page, not via Ajax, we get the right value selected for us. So this may be another reason to use trackby syntax, to tell the server the right value. Of course, if you are sending this by Ajax yourself, you should be preparing which object you are sending, so you can simply select the shipment itself and call the shipment ID on it if the server only expects the shipment ID, and this will be perfectly fine because you're playing with it with JavaScript. But if you're sending this directly to the server and don't have control from JavaScript, you can use trackby to set the value that you want to be sent to the server, and use it also for comparison in here. Now, this is everything I wanted to talk about for the select until maybe 2 or 3 days ago, until someone had a problem in their project with the select that was even more complex than that, and I thought it would be a good bonus to show it to you. Let's say that our data source only included shipment ID as part of the object. It kind of makes sense because the rest of the data is a bit redundant, and we have a lookup list in here that contains them anyway. So let's say we just had shipment ID set to 2. There are several implications of this. Of course, our calculation method will be different. For here, I'll try to do it just very stupidly. So I'll say shipment flat cost initialized to 0 and loop over the values that we have inside the scope shipment method. So I'll say here we loop until the scope shipment methods dot length, and pretty much the same comparison we had before, but this time it hopefully has more meaning. We will say if each of these shipment methods has a shipment ID that's equivalent to the order shipment ID, then we will set the shipment flat cost to the shipment flat cost coming from that particular shipment method. So put the same thing dot flat cost and just break, and we will use this in our calculation. Let's say here is the value. Go back here and we see the same initial situations that we got into before, which is we can see the total cost reflecting the flat cost that we have, which means the calculation is passing, which means the object really knows which shipment ID we have, but it's not selected in here. There is one thing that's quite obvious, which is here we just say shipment, not shipment ID. So let's try and fix that. And no, nothing. There is another thing that may be obvious, which is documented in Angular.js documentation for the ngselect, which is how to select only part of the object, not the object itself. So here we can say instead of just displaying shipment.name and selecting the entire object, we want to select the shipment ID and display it as shipment.name. That's how you can tell that you want a particular property to be the key and another property to be the text, and still nothing. We are not getting anything in particular, and if we select this in here, it's not even working. Like we can't even select anymore. It just doesn't work. And we can see the total cost is just the quantity multiplied by the cost per item. So we can select. Something is really gone wrong in here. One way to investigate this is to see how our scope objects are like in the browser, and the easiest way to do this is to go to Google and say Angular.JS for Chrome and just get the first link you find on there. It should be the Angular Batarang Chrome extension, and what this Chrome extension gives you is this very nice Angular properties tab here in the console, and this allows you to see what are the objects that are in scope for this HTML element and that you can see, and then you can easily inspect them. So let's go and check how the order is like. You can see that the shipment ID is undefined, so this pretty much tells us what's happening in here. But is it undefined from the beginning? Let's see. I did a refresh and we'll go to the order again. Shipment ID is set to 2. So what's really happening in here? Let's have a look at the code. What does this syntax mean again? What it really does mean is that Angular.js expects an object very similar to each object in the shipment methods array that has a shipment ID property to be selected and tracked by, and this object will be used so that the ID is being set to the value. Starting here, you realize I got very slow because this is quite confusing. You can say that this syntax is very unuseful in most cases, because this syntax, if you want the shipment ID on something to be selected, then you probably want another shipment ID to be matched, right? And this doesn't really work. So the first thing I tried to do when I was solving this, I said, okay, let's say the model is the order itself. The order has a shipment ID property, right? Which happened by accident to be the same name of shipment ID property as well. So if the ID property in here was not shipment ID, it was just ID, this would be a problem because this would give us the ID of the order itself, not the shipment. But it happened to be called shipment ID, so hopefully we should see this expressing chosen, and that's all nice. But let's change it now, and what happened? Everything got screwed up. This is because what Angular.js does is that it replaces the entire ngmodel when you make a selection. So what it does is that it changes the entire order to one of the shipment methods. Of course we don't want to do that. That's why the whole page got screwed up, because the object has become a shipment model only, and we can see this from here. Everything in the order got overridden, and it only has the order from upwards. So let's try to get the scope for this particular element. And while at the top page the order is seen correctly because the controller is set at the form level, when we go inside it and we get a new scope for the drop downs, the order is undefined. It's quite confused, because what really happened is it tried to set it to one of these shipment methods, and then it was trying to get shipment ID. And how to solve this? Unfortunately, I don't have a best solution to this. I only have a hack, but I'm going to share it with you. We go here, we'll bring this back, and we'll bring this to shipment ID again. So this is the earlier situation. At least we didn't screw things very much. And what we're going to do is, although we only have a shipment ID property, it does not mean that we cannot provide Angular an object to play with. So what I'm going to do in here, I'll say ngInit, which is a place to execute code. similar to what I could do in the controller as well. I'll say order dot underscore shipment, and I just like this convention, which is the thing is I don't really want in the model, I want them to be as underscores. And in Angular.js 1.2.0 they said, okay, we'll go by convention and we'll make things that start with underscore similar to things that start with $sign. It doesn't send them in the objects to the server, except that this caused some people some trouble. I can assume, for example, people who deal with MongoDB would really hate that, because they have the underscore ID property that they probably do want to send to the server. So Angular.js returned it back quickly, I think in 1.2.1. However, I still find this underscore convention to be nice for showing to the developers that these are things that don't really belong to the object. And we can set this to be an object with a shipment ID property. So what we're going to say here, okay, this shipment is a shipment with a shipment ID property set to the order shipment ID. And then we can use this shipment itself as the model in here. Let's see if this works. Yes, it does seem to work. We have the calculation right and we have the selection right. What happens when we change the selection though? So I'll change this here, and you can see that the total cost was not affected because the total cost is not using underscore shipment. So what happened in here is that underscore shipment only got changed. Let's see how the order is like. So we'll go inspect this element, make sure we have the Angular.js tab open, and we open the order, and we have shipment set to a shipment with flat cost of 5. But shipment ID will not change it because shipment ID is still set to 2 and nobody told it to be changed. So we can work around this by telling it to be changed. So this is like doing two-way mapping with your own hands instead of getting Angular.js to do it for you. It's very hacky, it's not good, but it does work. So here we'll say whenever the selection changes, we want to pretty much reverse this. So we'll say order.shipment ID should be equivalent to the order shipment dot shipment ID. So what this does for us is that it does a synchronization for us. So on init we create the object, we fill the shipment ID property for Angular.js so that it can use it for tracking, and then when things change we get the object, the new object in here, order.shipment, and I say new object because it will be overridden via the ngmodel. So maybe it will be 1 or 3 or 2 again after another change. We read the shipment ID from it and we assign it to the shipment ID in the order. I did mean to have everything in the HTML and have the underscore notation so that my controller hasn't changed it in here. It doesn't know anything about this underscore shipment thingy. It only deals with the shipment ID properties as intended. Let's see if this works. Of course, we know that the initial selection was working, but we want to ensure that when we change the selection it does work. And yes, we got the shipment with a cost of $5 only, and now we get the one with $15. We can go back to $10 and again to 5, and everything seems to work. And yes, this bit is hacky, not as nice as the trackby bit, but I think these cover most of the cases when you are going to deal with the select element in Angular.js. At the end, thanks for watching this video, and please Share the love if you think you found something useful. If you have any questions, you can contact me via my blog, gurustop.net, or on Twitter as @Meligy. You can also leave your question in a comment here and I'll be watching them. If you have any other topics around AngularJS or anything else that you would like me to talk about next, also let me know. Blog, Twitter, YouTube comments would work. And thanks again. Goodbye.